Hi, I'm Jake Kouns, CEO of Risk-Based Security. Welcome to this edition of The Right Security, the show which we spend time talking with leaders and veterans in the security space, tackling the issues of the day. I want to welcome everyone to the show. But before we get started, I do need to call some attention to the glorious stash that I have started to grow. In fact, this is week 2 for those that are counting. I've had a lot of people asking me what happened to the beard? Why do you have a stash? So yeah, there is a reason. We're taking part in Movember this year. So we're helping to raise funds and awareness for mental health issues for Movember for all the dads, brothers, sons, and mates in our lives. It's just not about growing a mustache. There's lots of ways to get involved, exercising and more. We'll add some links in to the show notes. If you're interested, please considering, get involved. We're trying to do a bunch of other community efforts as well. We're always looking for ways to get involved with local communities. So, all right, now that is behind us, in today's episode, I'm joined by Jennifer Ayers. Some know her by Jen. Jennifer's the Chief Operating Officer at DNSFilter. She has over 20 years of cybersecurity experience. Prior to DNSFilter, she was at CrowdStrike, serving as the Vice President of Overwatch and Security Response. Before that, she was the Senior Director of Product Management. And she also spent 3 years at FireEye on the security operations side. Jennifer's held other multiple roles, particularly for GE as a cyber leader in incident response, computer forensics, and supplier security. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jake. It's nice to meet you.
All right, Jen, before we get started, I do need to give a shout out to one of your coworkers, Pete Woods, who I believe is the Director of DevOps at your company. He has the most amazing stash. And in fact, I don't know if we can in post put his picture in or not, but the way he looks, this is what I think my mustache looks like. Then I realize it isn't at all. But do you think it'd be possible that you could send him my regards for such a glorious mustache?
Absolutely. I will. He will get a big kick out of it.
Awesome. All right. So let's get serious. Today, I'm looking forward to covering DNS with you and really how to protect your organization. So I think you're aware we have a lot of viewers that are still new to cybersecurity, trying to figure out what they're doing, learning IT concepts. So I want to take a few moments to set the stage with you. So I want to ask you, and to help everyone, what actually is DNS? And what have you found is the easiest way to describe DNS to newcomers?
So I think there's a number of different ways you can describe it to newcomers, but DNS, or a domain name, really has to do with how you effectively resolve from a name to a number, or a name to a number very similar to the phone book. So you look somebody's name up, I look up Jake, and Jake has an assigned phone number to it. I go to google.com, Google has an assigned IP address or assigned number to it. And that is very simplistic to describe a very complex system in the world of DNS. There's a lot more layers that go to that. There's a lot more pieces that go to it, but probably the easiest way to start. DNS is something that every single person who uses the internet uses, as well as every system that is effectively connected to an internal system, an internal network, or system to system, or system to internet, system to cloud. So DNS is really a fundamental way of how the transmission of information occurs, and essentially is also one of those areas that tends to be the most overlooked from a security perspective.
That's a great way to describe it. I think my way these days has been so simplistic. Maybe it's too simplistic. I've been telling people, hey, do you remember anyone's cell phone number anymore? Do you remember people's phone numbers? And they all give me these blank looks. And I say, that's pretty much what DNS is. You just hit on your phone, right? So, all right. So what about this?
That's true.
There was a lot of talk about DNSSEC, right? So domain name security, system security extensions, I believe. And I got to be honest, I haven't heard much at all about it recently. I know I'm throwing a curveball at you here, but do you have any insight on what the heck's going on with DNSSEC? And are you or DNSFilter involved with it at all by chance?
So I think there's still a lot of active conversations going on and multiple different points of view. But from DNSSEC perspective, yes, on the DNSFilter side, this is something that DNS security is something that we're looking at and have looked at for the past several of years. DNSSEC could mean a variety of different things, whether it's encrypted DNS traffic using DOT or DOH. It could also ultimately mean the various ways of different types of transmissibility. So it's a little bit more of a broad topic, and I apologize for not, pinpointing on a specific thing, but we're definitely involved and we're definitely engaged in that particular space and leverage multiple types of technology to be able to protect our customers. There's obviously more information. We've actually done some recent blogs on our website about DNS encryption itself, how we handle DOT and DOH, or DNS over TLS and DNS over HTTPS. When it's not light reading, that's for sure. These are a little bit hard to understand in terms of the way that DNS over TLS and DNS over HTTPS works. So DNS over HTTPS, very browser-based. DNS over TLS is much more on the backside. So, we're more than happy to answer questions. We have a chat bot on our website. If people do have questions, we're more than happy to answer them.
When thinking about security issues of DNS, I want to ask you a little bit how to categorize it. And the reason I say that is when I'm trying to explain things to people, I usually will say things like, well, DNS can be used to maybe attack a company directly, like impersonate or cause an outage. It could be used, DNS can be used to trick employees to go to malicious websites. And even DNS could be used to control malware or other things. What is a better way to sort of maybe categorize or put into buckets? Just there's so many different ways that DNS can be attacked.
I think you really captured the bulk and the most known ways that DNS can be used. But as I highlighted a little bit earlier, DNS isn't just about the simple aspect of name resolution of Google and pull up your web page. There's quite a few things that happen in the back end, especially in the context of sending records and different record types. So when you're using email, for example, you're resolving, the name itself of gmail.com, but you're also sending an MX type record. I think one of the areas that is overlooked is what happens within those record types themselves. There's not a lot of visibility that's provided today, but it is certainly an avenue that I have seen used in the past for adversaries to use that type of avenue, such as a TXT record, to send, stolen intellectual property, or using it for, beyond command and control, but instead using it as a transmission layer. So nobody's really looking at specific record size. Most of the time, maybe XYZ size is considered normal traffic, and then you have a much larger set of traffic within the DNS record itself. So there's a lot of, it is complex in its own way, but when you start to peel back the onion, it really becomes a little bit more clear. Also in the sense of DNS and how DNS is used. What are the relationships? What are relationships between domains? How does traffic flow? Where does traffic flow? Is a system talking to something that it shouldn't be? There's so many different parts to the puzzle. It's not an impossible puzzle to solve, especially if you have a good, security program, or you're implementing a good security program, and being able to look at each aspect of your environment from endpoint to network to DNS.
DNSFilter, your company just published their first ever, and now, if I understand correctly, an annual domain threat report. We'll definitely be sure to, again, drop the link in the show notes so everyone can go check it out. But before we dive in some of the specific topics and questions I have, I was curious, can you give a little maybe insider details on what goes into making a report like this? And I think the company was founded in 2015, if I've got that right, and have just now decided to publish this. So can you give us a little inside details on what goes into this?
Sure. Annual reports are one of my favorite things to do. I've done them, in my previous roles, and then here at DNSFilter as well. And what is the most important aspect to me about writing these types of reports isn't just about looking at the type of data that you have, but also compiling that data into a usable format for people to read. And it's one thing to go through and read a giant threat report and walk away with, I just read a giant threat report, but it's integral to me that people can take the information that we're providing and execute on that and do something with it, put protections in place. So most of these reports, whether you're at DNSFilter or in, looking at other types of vendor reports, they're built off of a compilation of data. And, whether that's your existing customer data or whether it's a combination of your customer data plus, the customer data that you collect plus, open source intelligence that's currently available. Really, it's about identifying the trends, explaining why that trend is important, and explaining how to protect yourself against XYZ type of threat. So an example in our report was talking about, top level domains or TLDs and the interesting usage of the .xyz type, the .xyz extension. It was really novel to be able to see this over the data, really novel to be able to see what that looked like over the past couple of years and how the trend of utilization has gone up. And then when you apply our capabilities of, categorizing these types of domains, what domain categories are using that XYZ type of domain more than others. So really be able to look at those types of trends and glean information that says, hey, look, .xyz isn't necessarily bad, but we are starting to see a little bit more of an uptick of usage on it for things like phishing or, definitely in some cases redirecting from hijacking type of activity.
Based on your findings, it seems that you believe that DNS attacks are on the rise. I guess if you speak to people in security, they might say that, hey, it feels like every attack is on the rise in all areas. But can you provide some thoughts here on why you believe DNS attacks are on the rise, maybe how they're manifesting, and if you want, walking us through maybe a little bit more of sort of common DNS attacks that you're starting to see?
Sure. So to clarify, DNS specific based attacks can be, can be construed, I think, in multiple different ways. But DNS being used as part of an attack is, not necessarily just on a rise, but a regularly occurring theme. So as you start to see different, ransomware types of attacks, or, as we call it, e-crime in the industry, or nation state types of attacks, there's always an element or a part of DNS that ultimately plays in that. Whether it's the initial phases of, where they're trying to get into the environment through some level of social engineering, whether, and using hijacked websites, or whether it's spear phishing campaigns or different avenues like that. DNS is essentially being used in that capacity to create the beginning stages in some types of attacks. Other types of attacks from more specific DNS layer, your traditional denial of service, your traditional mechanisms of really how using DNS as a way to prevent people from being able to get to a system, using DNS as a way to redirect people to get to the other, to where you want them to go, or even using DNS in the context of destruction to shut something down. So are we seeing a rise of DNS-based attacks? Yes, that could be across for two different things, as you highlighted, the rise of various types of attacks as a whole, and also deeper visibility into DNS being used in this manner.
In the domain threat report, when I was reading through it, looked like the findings make it believe that or call out that a lot of malicious domains encountered are belonging to specific country top level domains. So I have sort of two questions, maybe to provide some more context or set me on the right path here about sort of top level domains from a country standpoint. What do you think that says about sort of the state of cybersecurity maybe as a whole? And then is this just simply blocking traffic to and from countries that aren't playing well?
Probably not quite as nefarious as that. When you look at the aspect of country level domains, just because it ends in a .ru domain doesn't necessarily mean that is particularly related to Russia itself, right? That is essentially highlighting that the infrastructure, was based in Russia. It doesn't mean, you can't just make that one-for-one inference that, .ru automatically means Russia is attacking. What that does show, though, is the availability of infrastructure or hosted infrastructure from many different countries. It's not so easy, the boundaries that used to exist don't exist anymore. It could be, it could be any country that's hosting infrastructure in the .ru domain space, and, inherently creating that slight misdirection that the Russians are attacking. You have to be very careful when you're starting to do that type of analysis, and the analysis that we provided. It's not a finger pointing game. It's really about being aware of where your traffic is coming from and where your traffic is going to. If you're a small company, for example, and you're not international, you're not doing business globally, then maybe one avenue to protect yourself is to block access to domains that are not hosted within the country that you are currently operating in.
With your DNS hat on, what are your thoughts on how attackers are choosing their targets these days?
That's a very good question. It seems to be a little bit all over the map. If you're looking at the e-crime space, he who has, more money will win. If you're looking at, sort of the nation state space, who, depending on what those types of adversaries are particularly looking for, what their local agenda may be, what their militaristic agenda may be. I think, in my opinion, right now, our bigger risk isn't necessarily just the typical large or extra large enterprise companies. I think the bigger risk to me is actually in the much smaller space, in the SMB and the mid-market space. Companies who work for, are attached to, contract out to these larger entities who don't necessarily have the ability, the funding to have really strong security programs. If you look at things like Colonial Pipeline or JBS, especially as parent units, they've invested in security over the years. They have strong security programs, but, Colonial and JBS also, outsource or contract out some parts of their particular process, whether it's making a widget for a thing, whether it's the supplier, the shipping or the logistics aspect. And everybody is connected, right? We've moved to this whole just in time over the last 30 years of, now automatically orders are being sent down the supply chain. As you start to dig into that supply chain, that starts to become more and more visible as a significant risk, because a lot of security products on the market today have effectively become unaffordable for, SMB and mid-market customers. Like, you can't necessarily pay or don't have the budget to spend, $1 million to deploy the hottest security tools on the market, or just because they're available, right? You have to do what's within your budget and within your capabilities of doing. So I think we're starting to see, that it's becoming visible. It's been a risk for years that the supply chain is truly an avenue that is going to be much more targeted than we've ever seen, because it's easy.
Let's talk about ransomware for a moment. How could we not, right? Ransomware is still maybe one of the hottest topics. So, and by the way, seeing what appears to be some substantial law enforcement actions, successful ones over the past couple of weeks. But regardless, we're still seeing a lot of vendors, just like you said, out there charging expensive fees. But a lot of these vendors are now marketing, they stop ransomware in their tracks, and we'll stop ransomware and all this sort of stuff. From your point of view, how are you seeing attackers and ransomware operators using DNS as part of these operations?
Again, on the DNS side, DNS plays a fundamental role in, ultimately in the attack chain. So in the context of ransomware, more specifically, if it started out with spear phishing, also in the sense of, some, from ransomware that uses more RDP type of activity or remote access type of activity. I mean, you saw significant trends of that happening last year as a lot of companies pushed from on-site to remote. They had no way for their employees to get in, so they're spinning up the nearest remote access capability tool that they have. TeamViewer, basic, simple, spin up a Microsoft RDP server in Amazon with no two-factor authentication. I mean, these attackers aren't doing, some groups are very, very, very sophisticated, but most of them are not. So they're using simple things. So DNS, in the sense of, what do you allow, in your environment? Do you allow remote access type of tools? Do you resolve on the internet, Jake's remote service.com that anybody could potentially find? So DNS, again, plays the role in the sense of, it's usual, have a domain, resolve to IP, get presented site, and log in.
I've been involved in several DNS debates over the years. So I want to ask you how you respond. So what do you say to people that are on the side of the debate that people say DNS doesn't play a great role in security? People can just hit the IP directly, right? If DNS is causing me problems or being filtered or whatever, I'll just hit the IP directly. You think about some of the cloud SaaS WAFs that are deployed, and some of these other things out there, filters, etc. So, if it's really important, I'll just directly hit an IP address, not have to have DNS in the middle. So, what is your thoughts when people are saying these important attacks aren't even relying or using DNS?
Predominantly, if you are looking at later stage aspects in the attack, I would agree with you. But not everybody's going to know the IP address right off the bat, right? I mean, in terms of internet-facing IP addresses, sure, you could probably use different type of scanner, but when you're talking about what these more sophisticated adversaries are trying to do and the mechanisms that they ultimately use to conduct lateral movement, you need to know what the internal layout of an organization or environment effectively looks like before you can just go to an IP address. So everything starts at the beginning, and again, everything starts with a domain name. Whether it's I'm going to jake@gmail.com, whether it's I want Jake to click on my hijacked website, or whether I want Jake to click on my phishing website. Our world wraps around our knowledge of, to use your analogy, that Jake is in my phone book. I don't know what Jake's phone number is. I know if I go to my phone book and I click on Jake, it's going to call him. I didn't quite answer your question, directly, specifically, but I'm trying to figure out how to articulate that it doesn't, is it possible to attack without DNS? The answer is yes. Is it common? Absolutely not.
What do you say to folks that don't run their own DNS servers, so they don't think they have any issues that they need to actually address?
So for people that don't run their own DNS, I think my first initial reaction to that is, are you aware of what security your current DNS provider has put in place? Are you leveraging or maximizing, the security features that they have? Do they support, are you leveraging? If they don't, do they support, and do you use, DNS over TLS or DNS over HTTPS? There's many different ways to approach that, but go and check your provider and make sure you understand what security protections that they have put in place is probably my best and more actual response on that one.
In June of this year, in 2021, you did an interview that was published, and the title was "Wisdom from the Women Leading the Cybersecurity Industry." And I have to be honest, when I went to read it, the top call out was great. You were quoted as saying, "Don't take crap from anyone. There is acknowledging that people are smarter than you or have a different ideal than you, and that you can agree to disagree. But there's absolutely no reason to think that you are less than who you are because of that." It was a great interview. I'm going to encourage our viewers to read it. We'll put the links in there. But I'd love, can you give me sort of a quick recap of that sort of interview? Share some thoughts about that article. Just thoughts about some of your wisdom in leading.
That was in June. It's November. I would actually literally have to go back and reread what I said, but I think some of the fundamentals are the same. As somebody who has come up the ranks, especially in the cybersecurity field, and I'm not going to say, how many years. I definitely don't want to age myself, but I do think my gray hair shows that just a little bit. The truth is that this is, really my messaging in that particular article was for those that are starting out in the cybersecurity space. It can appear very, very daunting. And I do think that in some cases there have been some generated stereotypes that really actually aren't true, especially once you get to know people who've been experts in this field for quite some time about this, elite or closed door type of environment. I think anybody who's interested in cybersecurity should reach out to someone. Reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to know more. But I feel like this space is such a great space to be in. I've been doing this for my entire career. I don't know how not to do cybersecurity. I don't know how not to work in this space. And the fact that I've been in this field for more than 25 years really is a testament to not just the changing technologies and keeping up, but how interesting it is on a day-to-day basis. So when I say don't take crap from anybody, that was really around some questions that I've been asked, throughout my career about being told, oh, you don't have this specific degree, or you don't have this specific certification, you're not entry level enough for an entry level type of job. Either go find, go keep trying. Don't take crap from anybody and telling you that you're not good enough or that you're not interesting enough. Do what you need to do to figure out how to get your foot in the door.
So I want to stay on this topic for a little bit. I'm going to ask you a little bit deeper question about career change or getting into cybersecurity. I've tried to help a lot of people get into the security industry, and one of the things that I think most people are struggling with right now is that they just don't have the experience on their resume that these places are looking for, and I think you kind of alluded to it. And some of it's just absurd, right? It doesn't make any sense. So, you have any other recommendations for folks that they're not taking crap from anyone? They're trying the best they can, but they keep running into this. They don't have prior experience, and so they're not able to progress into getting that first job.
So there's prior experience, in two pieces, and I can tell you what I look at from my perspective. Prior work experience in general is one aspect of it. Interest in the security field is something different. I think my advice is if you're looking to get into cybersecurity, don't be daunted by that prior experience necessarily being prior security experience. Really, what you want to highlight is how you as a person have what you've done to learn more about cybersecurity yourself. I don't see enough resumes of people who are transitioning into this field that say, I built a home lab. I did, I've tested, I've ran Security Onion. I've installed my own proxy. I've reversed my own malware. I've read, the book Practical Malware Analysis. I've completed all the labs. I think when I, see some of these entry level resumes, and I certainly, we have a number of entry level positions here as well at DNSFilter. I don't see people advertising what they've done on the side or what they've done themselves enough. And I think that with the way that recruiting works and with the way that some recruiters are taught or informed by the hiring manager or even by the nature of their job, they're looking for specific things. They're looking for, I worked at CrowdStrike for 6 years. Instead, when you look at these entry level type of roles, I think there's different ways to word it that comes, that expresses the experience you have gained as an individual learner. Yeah. I'm the type of person that, for me, I'm going to be, I don't care if you're transitioning from being, the top chef of a restaurant. If you're in this field and you show me, or you can tell me all of the things that you've learned on your own because you have that kind of passion and that kind of curiosity, that's going to definitely get you a conversation with me.
I think that is some great feedback. And what I have been challenging folks that I've been talking to is that they need to show that they have that passion. A lot of folks that I've been running into here recently want to join a company, and the company sort of trains them and tells them what to do. And I do believe that it may not maybe be the nicest thing to say, but it's the honest thing to say that you need to put in some hard work in your own time and learn these things to show a company that you have these capabilities. So I everything you said, I agree with. Now I'm going to go to my next one here, because for you, when I looked at your career, starting as a practitioner, working your way to leadership. Now, holy cow, COO, right? You're doing more things than just security, obviously. So what's your feedback or thoughts to people on how to figure out what discipline, what security angle might be a good fit or of interest for them, given that there's just so much to do in security?
That is a really good question. And honestly, the only answer I have is try it. At one point I dabbled in policy and risk, discovered that really wasn't for me. I did the standard, putting together supplier security programs with GE, for example, learned a ton there, but that kind of, security policy and risk management definitely wasn't something that I was super enthusiastic about. I found my niche and my home in incident response. And I discovered that because at GE, somebody handed me a laptop with Encase on it and said, here, I need you to go do computer forensics. And I had never done it before in my life. But I found out that I had a passion for it and that I loved it. And so started out in forensics and e-discovery, and then moved more into incident response. And essentially incident response is definitely the lengthy part of my career. But I didn't know, and I don't, you can read, and you can certainly read, and you can certainly do research on different facets of information security, but I really don't think I would have known unless I had tried different things.
All right, coming in the home stretch here. So for companies that are struggling with too much work, too many assets, too many vulnerabilities, too much data, too many security vendors trying to sell things to them, what do you say to people that say they have too much data and they don't know how to use it, they don't even know where to start?
A very good question. And I think, walking into something like that, walking into the security space, walking into an environment, or even being in an environment can certainly be overwhelming. And where do you start is really, the answer is very simple. You pick a point. You pick a point in time. You pick a system. You pick a system type. You pick, a smaller site network. The only way to start is truly at the beginning, but the beginning has to be where you ultimately define it. And I don't mean that to sound like superbly philosophical, but it really is just identifying the place you feel like you need to start at. So if you have a list of 10 things, nobody can do all 10 at once. You have to pick a number, 1 through 3. I mean, if it even boils down to that, write down the 10 things, cut up the pieces of paper, put them in a hat and pull them out, but just pick a place to start.
All right, Jen. So what's the next big thing? Is there anything we have yet to uncover using DNS that we haven't talked about? Anything else on your mind that you want to share with us?
So I would definitely say, make sure that you do follow DNSFilter. We have a number of things on our roadmap and some very interesting research and development that we have going on in the back end right now. We'll be talking a lot more about that early next year. But I think there's there's definitely been some fascinating analysis and research that we've discovered. Some of that, we've kind of touched on a little bit in our threat report. But what we're really looking to be able to do is expand on that data analysis in next year's threat report as well. So going beyond just talking about the XYZ TLDs, but really talking about a lot of the behavior that we're ultimately seeing around that. I mean, you'd be surprised at how many when you're looking at DNS, or especially when you're looking at domains, and what correlations and relationships that you can start to understand and identify patterns from, or even in some cases, some fun aspects of being able to identify potential, we'll call it a little bit of crystal ball, and being able to see what potential trends may come up.
All right. Jennifer Ayers, Chief Operating Officer at DNSFilter. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your valuable insights today.
Thanks, Jake. It's certainly been a pleasure, and I hope we have the opportunity to do this again.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of The Right Security. As always, we'll have more details and links in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review, all that sort of stuff. And you can learn more about RBS at our website. Thank you for tuning in.